Picture this. The greatest prophet in human history draws his final breath on a windswept mountain. For 40 years he has been the voice of the Almighty, the rod that split seas, the man who spoke with God face to face, and then silence. But what if I told you that the moment Moses died, the spiritual realm exploded into motion, that within hours, perhaps even minutes, 7 earth-shattering events began unfolding that would reshape the destiny of nations? The death of Moses wasn't just the end of a man's life. It was the closing of a prophetic era, the conclusion of 40 years of miracles, rebellion, and divine encounters in the wilderness. But here's what most people miss. It wasn't the end of God's plan. It was the beginning of something far more explosive. Ancient texts tell us that the moment Moses took his final breath on Mount Nebo, a quiet yet thunderous transition began to unfold across the spiritual and physical realms. What followed wasn't grief alone. It was movement, acceleration, shock. Scripture records that Moses died in the land of Moab, and God himself buried him in a valley. But no one knows his burial place to this day. The mystery of Moses' burial remains unsolved, but the mission he carried didn't die in the desert. It was transferred, and it exploded into motion. This is the untold story of what happened next. These are the 7 shocking revelations that ancient scribes recorded, events so profound they would launch a new generation into their destiny and forever alter the course of human history. To understand the magnitude of what transpired, we must first grasp who Moses truly was. He wasn't merely a leader. He was the mediator between heaven and earth, the one who stood in the gap between divine wrath and human rebellion. For 4 decades, he had been Israel's lifeline, their connection to the Almighty. But now, on the heights of Mount Nebo, with the promised land spread before him like a divine tapestry, Moses' earthly mission reached its end. The ancient chroniclers tell us he was 120 years old. Yet his eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. This was no natural death of weakness. This was a divine appointment, a sacred transition, orchestrated from the throne room of eternity. The Israelites stood at the threshold of their greatest conquest, yet their greatest leader would not cross with them. It seemed like cosmic cruelty. But heaven operates by different laws than earth, and what appeared to be an ending was actually the most dramatic beginning in Israel's history. The moment Moses died, something unprecedented happened. God didn't convene a council of elders. He didn't call for elections or tribal debates. Instead, he spoke directly to Joshua, Moses' assistant, with words that would echo through eternity. "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them." This wasn't a spontaneous promotion. It was a divine succession plan that had been orchestrated for decades. Joshua had walked with Moses up Mount Sinai. He had guarded the tent of meeting. He had remained faithful when others feared. And now, without warning, he became the most powerful man in Israel, not by election, but by divine impartation. Ancient texts reveal that Moses had laid hands on Joshua before his death, transferring the spirit of wisdom. This wasn't merely human appointment. This was spiritual transference. One man dies, another man rises, but the mission of God never misses a beat. What God commanded Joshua next defied all human logic. He wasn't calling him to manage the wilderness. He was commanding him to conquer nations, fortified cities, armies of giants. And Joshua had never led a single military campaign. God spoke, as if the victory was already accomplished. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Here was the shocking truth. God gives assignments far beyond human capacity, not to crush us, but to prove himself through us. He doesn't offer strategy first, he offers presence. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. The land wasn't empty. Jericho wasn't waiting to surrender. There were walled cities, giants like the descendants of Anak, and multiple kings ready for war. Yet God spoke with absolute certainty because divine victory operates outside the realm of human possibility. You'd expect resistance. After all, Moses wasn't just a leader, he was the voice of God to the people. Now he was gone, replaced by a man who had always been second, Moses' assistant, not his equal. But what happened next was one of the most shocking turns in Israel's history. The people didn't just accept Joshua. They demanded absolute loyalty from one another, with execution as the consequence of rebellion. All that you command us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we heeded Moses in all things, so we will heed you. Whoever rebels against your command shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. This wasn't empty religious language. This was a generation that had watched the previous one die in the wilderness because of rebellion. They had seen Korah swallowed by the earth. They had wept as their own parents perished for grumbling and fear. The new generation rose with new resolve. No more hesitation, no more rebellion, no more wandering. They were united around urgency, a desperate desire to enter the promise and not fall short again. Remember the Red Sea? That iconic moment when Moses raised his staff and God split the sea like a curtain? Well, Moses may have been gone, but God wasn't finished making headlines. As the Israelites approached the Jordan River, swollen to flood stage during harvest season, the impossible happened again. The moment the priests carrying the ark stepped into the rushing waters, the river split. Dry ground appeared. A nation walked across just like at the Red Sea. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't metaphorical. This was an undeniable supernatural event, performed not to entertain, but to confirm. Ancient records tell us that on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses. God was speaking without words. This is my man, follow him. But here's what many miss. God didn't part the waters before they moved. He waited until the priests stepped in. Obedience before evidence, faith before the miracle. The river didn't part for spectators. It parted for believers who stepped forward with the presence of God on their shoulders. The Jordan had parted. The people had crossed. It seemed the hard part was over. But then came a moment that completely redefined the mission. As Joshua surveyed the fortified walls of Jericho, preparing for battle, he encountered a figure that would change everything. A man stood before him with a drawn sword. And when Joshua asked, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" the reply was shocking. "No, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Joshua fell on his face in worship, for he realized he wasn't speaking to a normal man or even an angelic messenger. Ancient scholars believe this was a pre-incarnate appearance of the divine warrior himself, the commander of heaven's armies. The battle for Jericho wasn't just about walls and warfare. God was making it crystal clear. This isn't your fight, it's mine. Before the Israelites even touched a sword, before they shouted at Jericho's walls, God reminded them this was spiritual warfare. Joshua learned that victory doesn't come by having a plan. It comes by having the commander's presence. When God takes over the battlefield, he doesn't come to support your agenda. He calls you to support his. For 40 years, manna had been the daily sign that God was with them. It came down from heaven every morning like dew, requiring no work, no planting, no plowing, just faith to collect it. It was the lifeline of a generation. And then, without warning, it stopped. The morning after they ate their first harvest from the promised land, the people awoke to find no manna. No angelic trumpet announced its end. No divine proclamation explained its absence. Just silence. This was shocking because manna had been more than food. It was proof of God's provision, his daily care, his supernatural sustenance. Its sudden absence could have triggered panic, but it actually revealed something profound. God was saying, "This is a new season. You can't live off yesterday's miracle." The manna was for survival in the desert, but Canaan wasn't about survival. It was about thriving, building, sowing, reaping, and reigning. That kind of life required a different kind of faith. Sometimes when God stops providing something familiar, it's not punishment, it's promotion. The nation had crossed the Jordan. They were standing in enemy territory within sight of Jericho's massive walls. They had momentum, unity, and God's promise. From a military standpoint, this was the moment to strike while morale was high. But then God gave an order so unexpected, so risky, it defied all strategic logic. Make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel. This was shocking. God deliberately weakened the entire male army right before battle. Circumcision would leave them unable to fight or defend themselves for several days. There were no backup forces, no reserve troops, no walls to hide behind. And yet they obeyed. Why would God risk everything right after such great victories? Because this wasn't just a military campaign. This was covenant fulfillment. All the males born during the 40-year wilderness journey had not been circumcised. They had grown up without fully entering into the covenant that began with Abraham. Before they could take the land, they had to take the mark of belonging to God. Before victory, there must be consecration. Before conquest, there must be covenant. God was saying, "You don't win because you're strong. You win because you're mine." Here's the profound truth hidden within these 7 shocking events. God's promises are never buried with a prophet. They are carried forward by obedience, by courage, by faith. Each of these revelations points to deeper spiritual laws that govern divine transition. God prepares successors. Leadership isn't left to chance. God doesn't pause his plan. While the world may pause and grief may weigh heavy, heaven keeps moving. God elevates the obedient, not the most powerful, but the most faithful. God leads with supernatural power. His miracles validate his messengers. And God fights for his people, taking over battles that were already his from the beginning. The ancient scribes recorded these events not merely as historical facts, but as eternal principles. They understood that what happened after Moses died was a template for how God operates in every generation, in every transition, in every season when it seems like all hope is lost. Moses was gone, but God wasn't. The wilderness had closed one chapter, but the banks of the Jordan opened another. And in that sacred space between endings and beginnings, heaven revealed something powerful about the nature of divine continuity. The silhouette of Moses fading into the sunrise, Joshua taking his place at the front of the people, the Ark of the Covenant glowing with divine light, the people crossing into Canaan, and in the distance, Jericho, awaiting its divine reckoning. This wasn't just ancient history. This is a message that echoes across time to anyone standing in their own season of loss, transition, or uncertainty. The same God who orchestrated these 7 shocking events after Moses died is still orchestrating divine transitions today. Perhaps you're in a wilderness season, wondering if God's promises died with a particular season of your life. Perhaps you're standing at your own Jordan, afraid to step into waters that seem impossible to cross. Or maybe you're facing walls that seem too high, enemies too strong, battles too overwhelming. Remember this: God hasn't stopped. He's just getting started. The promise doesn't end with the past. It begins with your next step of faith. The question isn't whether God can make a way. The question is whether you're willing to step into the water before it parts, to be consecrated before the battle, to let heaven's commander take over your impossible situations. What Jordan is God calling you to cross? What promise is waiting on the other side of your obedience? The story after Moses died teaches us that divine destiny never depends on human continuity. It depends on divine faithfulness. And that faithfulness is just as active in your life today as it was on the day the Jordan River split and the walls of Jericho began to tremble. The most shocking thing that happened after Moses died wasn't any single miracle. It was the revelation that God's greatest moves often begin right after our greatest losses. What will you do with that truth?